Lines and lineups, week 17. Hello, RotoGrinders and Vegas Insiders. Holden Kushner here alongside Dan Bach from RotoGrinders and Sharpside, the Sharpside app, and Monkey Knife Fight and everything else. And then K-Raj, of course, with VegasInsider.com. We got 5 games today. We're going to shake it up a little bit. We got 3 NFL games: Falcons, Bucks, Eagles, Giants, Steelers, Ravens. Then we're going to get to the college semifinals. So that should be fun with Clemson, Ohio State, and Oklahoma, and LSU. K-Raj, how you been, buddy? Hanukkah to you, and Merry Christmas to you, Dan Bach, and everybody else. Just whatever you do, Festivus, have a good time with that. But so week 16 in the books. How'd you do, K-Raj?
How did I do? I did well with the Jets on Sunday. I thought that would be a good spot for them against the Steelers with their Grinch coach, Adam Gase. But, Pittsburgh, I mean, they're on the verge of, maybe being in the playoffs with no quarterback, which is amazing. And I took a shot with the Chargers. I thought they'd win that finale at home against the Raiders, and I was way off on that one. I did like Arizona, and I did like Philadelphia. I know we're kind of going 20/20 hindsight on it, but I thought the Eagles were a good spot against the Cowboys, and Arizona had been a good road dog this year. I didn't think they'd do what they did to Seattle, but besides that, I mean, just coming down the stretch, I mean, I know we'll talk about week 17. It's just so difficult with some of these matchups here with a lot of these guys potentially not playing.
Hey, Dan, I think a lot of people are happy that the Vikings game was not on the main slate because they would have played Mike Boone and completely struggled. But week 17 coming up, I just wonder, you've got your bankroll through the first 16 weeks. This is it for the regular season. Of course, there's a lot to play in the postseason. That's some of my favorite DFS football. But how do you manage your bankroll here in week 17?
Yeah, I don't think I stray too much from what you've been doing up to this point. I mean, the GPPs are still pretty much in line with what we've seen. And it's again, more about information, more about motivation. You're going to be seeing narratives this week about, certain statistical thresholds that some players might need to hit. I don't put a lot of stock in that, but, if it's like, $500,000, if somebody gets, 5 receptions or something to hit a threshold, then maybe you pay attention to it. But news reporting is as good as it's ever been. So we should have a pretty good idea. And I think it's important to certainly look at the lines going into the game, because that's going to tell us a story about who is interested in playing and who's not. Right off the bat, I'm looking and seeing, Houston 3-point underdogs to Tennessee at home. Obviously, Pittsburgh favored against Baltimore. You've got Buffalo only, a 1.5 favorite against the Jets. So, there's clearly a couple of spots there that you can see that there's going to be teams that are probably going to be not playing their starters the entire game. And, that's obviously something you can take advantage of if you are looking for lower priced guys. And we'll talk about one of those games today.
Yep, no doubt about it. Hey, K-Raj, let's get into the betting side here. Falcons at the Bucks. It's a 1:00 game. On Sunday, all the games are on Sunday. We just have the one night game with the Seahawks and the Niners. But this is a pick'em with the Falcons at the Bucks. 49.5 is the total. It's the highest total of the week. We'll get to the total after we talk to Dan again about DFS side. But Falcons-Bucks pick'em. This is an interesting one here because Godwin's basically done. We know who the weapons are for the Bucks offensively. Defensively, they can stop the run with the Falcons. Freeman's coming off a big week. And on the other side, I mean, this could be a nice high-scoring game. And maybe you just look at the total for the Falcons because they could put up some big points this week.
Well, last time Holden, these teams played back at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in late November, the Buccaneers won that game 35-22, and that was after the Falcons had won a pair of games on the road at New Orleans and at Carolina, which kind of spurred their turnaround. And obviously they're not going to make the playoffs, but I guess the playing for the coach, people were talking about Dan Quinn could have gotten fired by the bye week, and let's see how it goes. And this is a team that's won 5 of 7 down the stretch, and one of those losses came to the Saints at home. So Atlanta obviously has saved their best football for last, which doesn't really mean much, but at least they're playing with some momentum and trying to avoid a 10-loss season. And I'm sure the Falcons would like to avoid the season sweep against Tampa Bay after losing that game to the Buccaneers at home last month. And when you look at the Bucs, they had that 4-game winning streak halted before they lost to Houston this past Saturday, a game that they dug themselves a big hole. Jameis threw a couple picks, and then the Buccaneers rallied back to tie it. And then the Buccaneers could do nothing in the second half, and Houston ended up winning. and then clinching the AFC South title. But I think it's going to be a tough spot for Tampa Bay just because they haven't been good at home. Their 2 home wins are by 3 to the Colts and by 3 to the Cardinals. So we know Tampa Bay, when we talk about the Chargers with no home field advantage, the Bucs, it feels like they have no home field advantage. They haven't been good at home in a while. So Atlanta here, they're playing a little bit better football. I know that Tampa Bay, they played a bit better defensively the last few weeks after they've had that huge overrun, and they barely stayed under last week against Houston after the high-scoring first half. But I think Atlanta could be worth a look here as a short dog or even a pick 'em.
It's interesting that it's a pick 'em, that they're on the road too. I mean, what does that say about the Bucs, or maybe does it say more about the Falcons?
Well, the Falcons are playing better, and I know the Bucs were playing better, but the Bucs just at home, there's nothing that you're not afraid of them. Mm-hmm. I think that's what it comes down to. And when this Atlanta team, you look back at them, I mean, sure, they could have lost that San Francisco game at the end. They had the Matt Ryan to Julio Jones touchdown and then the crazy touchdown on the fumble return on the kickoff. But at the same time, this is an Atlanta team that's been better defensively after they were horrible the first half of the year. And they've won 3 straight on the road. If you look back at it, beating the 49ers, they handled Carolina, they handled the Saints. So I'm sure Atlanta here, again, losing to Tampa Bay the first time they just saw them, I'm sure they don't want to lose to them twice. And 7-9, yes, looks better than 6-10. But for Atlanta, 7-9, it's almost a miracle if they finish at that, considering their start was so horrible.
All right, Dan, DFS perspective, since the total's the highest on the slate, this will be pretty popular, maybe the most popular game. There's a lot of different ways to go. I want to start with the Falcons, though. Matt Ryan, Julio Jones. Ridley went down the last couple of games. Jones has went off. He has had success against the Bucs in the past. Didn't really blow up earlier this game in their first meeting. But on the Falcons side, looks like that passing game is very juicy this week.
Yeah, this is easily the most stackable game on the slate here because you talk about that Ridley injury. Since that's happened, Julio Jones has had 35 targets the last 2 weeks. Just insanity in terms of the volume. So I don't think that's changing here against a team that, kind of funnels to the pass because they're so good defensively versus the run the Bucs are. And I totally think that, Atlanta is playing for Dan Quinn here. They've made it very clear. They've got great motivation there. I don't think they want to see him fired at the end of the season. So, I think these are 2 very live teams here. Matt Ryan, I kind of hoped he was going to do a little bit more. I mean, the yardage was there at 384 against Jacksonville, but only 1 touchdown. So variance didn't quite swing his way so much. But really the only other guy I think to talk about here is Austin Hooper. Last week he was inexplicably priced down on DraftKings. Now he's up to 5,800. I think he's like the 4th or 5th highest priced tight end. But when you take Ridley out of the equation, there's a lot more targets to go his way. I'm not buying the Devontae Freeman, back-to-back big games. I mean, he crushed versus just a great spot there against Jacksonville. So for me, it's back to Julio, back to Matt Ryan, and back to Austin Hooper on the Atlanta side.
Yeah, so the third option really isn't there with Gage or Blake. Nobody stepped up to this point. The Bucs, Perriman's just stepped in, and he's been kind of a Mike Evans, Chris Godwin hybrid. It's instead of choosing one of those guys a week, you got it in Perriman. Watson, I was expecting a little bit more out of him. Justin Watson, Ronald Jones did step up. Arians said they were going to throw to the backs a little bit more. They throw to the tight ends too. That didn't hammer out. A lot of different ways to go with the Bucs. So why don't you break that down? First of all, let's get this out of the way. Any interest in Ronald Jones? Any?
Maybe a little bit in a game stack. I mean, he's pretty cheap at 4,900. I don't know that we need to on this slate because there's so many games for us. I mean, you've got every game but one on here. Do we really want to have Ronald Jones be the guy? Do we see him getting 25 fantasy points? Probably not. But if I'm multi-entering, I'd have him in my player pool. But, Jameis Winston, he's just so steady when it comes to a couple of things, yardage and interceptions. And touchdowns have been pretty good this year too. But, 28 INTs. We got to get to the 30-30 INTs this season. So, the beautiful thing is there's really not a game flow that doesn't suit him well. Because if they get up, they're still going to throw it. If they're down, obviously he's going to throw it. And for me, the guy I think Watson, if I'm looking at a $4,900 guy, it's Watson. If you watched that game last week, he should have had a better statistical day than he had. He ran a couple questionable routes, had some bad throws by Jameis, but ultimately this guy could have had a couple of touchdowns in this game. So at 4,900, I'd much prefer him than going to Perryman all the way up to 67. And I'm not writing off an O.J. Howard either at 4,300. I mean, he had a great first half. He had 7 targets, just, only completed 3 of those for 46 yards. So if, you get 3 more receptions on that for another 46 yards at 4,300, you're at almost 15 fantasy points. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, and that's pretty good point per dollar for you there.
Yeah, and you could always go with the Falcons defense, even if you're playing Jameis Winston, because you're going to get some points there. 4 interceptions, even if you give up 35 points, 4 interceptions, you get another few sacks, maybe a touchdown. Yep. All of a sudden, things are going well for you. All right, K-Raj, total here, 49.5. Which way you leaning?
I actually like the under here just because of what the Falcons have done defensively on the road of late. 9 against the Saints, 3 against Carolina, even 22 against San Francisco. And again, I'm kind of going a little vice versa after the first game sailed way over the total, that 35-22 win by Tampa Bay, over 51.5. And this one has dipped down a little bit. And I know these teams have had high scoring affairs over the years, but also, again, you have to make sure when you're playing an under with Tampa Bay that you don't have that dreadful pick 6 by Jameis Winston. That as long as you don't have that in the equation, then I think you got a shot. And that's the problem, is you can't have Jameis be setting up touchdowns for the opposing team. And I just think that even though Tampa Bay has had this huge overrun, it ended against Houston last week, that we can see an under here. Not saying overwhelming under, but that it stays under the total.
All right, guys, let's move on. 425. Eagles laying 4.5 on the road at the Giants. The total is 45.5. K-Raj, the big deal. The Eagles beat the Cowboys at home. Ugly. How, even though it's the Giants, it's the Eagles on the road giving 4.5. Oh, man. I have a hard time siding with the Eagles here. Come on. Change my mind. Are you going to?
Well, a couple things on this. Number one, which I don't know if it makes that big of a difference or not. Think about this. The 2 biggest games that Daniel Jones played this year both came against the Redskins. I mean, fair to say, and I guess Tampa Bay, that comeback, but he was great against Washington twice, and he's not playing Washington coming up this week. And yes, it is scary after the Eagles just beat the Cowboys as a short home underdog, and now they're going on the road to try to wrap up the division title. And again, who was the guy that torched the torched the Eagles 2 weeks ago? It was Eli Manning, and he's not in there now. And then I will see what Daniel Jones does against this Eagles defense. And I understand the Eagles have found a way to win the last few weeks, but hey, they put themselves in a position to win the division. And this is a Giants team that, they're off back-to-back wins. They've scored 77 points against the Dolphins and the Redskins. And Philadelphia is obviously a step up. And look at the second half of that Eagles-Giants game. The Giants did nothing offensively, and the Eagles were able to come back in spite of still not playing well in the first half and save their season, or still at least had a pulse by winning that game in overtime. So the Eagles with some momentum. I get that the Giants are playing better of late, but also when you look back at it, though, guys, the Giants as a home underdog, just not good. As simple as that this year. Lost by 18 to the Packers, lost by 19 to the Cowboys, lost by 18 to the Vikings, lost by 14 to the Bills. So they got blown out in all these games when they're getting points. And who are the home wins against? The Dolphins, the Redskins, teams that they should beat. So I'm not going to overthink this. I'd look at the Eagles.
So this will be interesting, Dan, because in all likelihood, Ertz is not going to play. And if he does, he's got a broken rib. Like, how effective is he going to be? So we got some values here on the Philadelphia side. Goddard is going to be very popular in all likelihood. And then here's the big question. Howard might be back this week. Sanders has been going off.
Yeah.
What do you do with this? I mean, the Eagles have no receiving options, Greg Ward and Goddard. So you would think they're going to run the ball a whole bunch. What does this do to Sanders if Howard's back?
That's a great question. I mean, Sanders has been so good. I mean, you're looking, especially from a fantasy perspective, but even like a real life perspective. I've liked what I've seen from him. Over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. I don't know that his role is going to change a ton here with Jordan Howard coming back, because I feel like, they've kind of found a recipe that works with Miles Sanders. And if anything, I think Howard maybe goes into that Boston Scott role and Sanders kind of remains the go-to guy here. So I think I'm willing to give him a look, especially on DraftKings. He's under 7K. The targets continue to be consistent, even when Howard was in there. So I like what I've seen from him. He's absolutely somebody that I think I'd be willing to play here. And you talked about the guy who's probably going to be mega chalk, and that's Goddard. I mean, if Ertz decides not to play here, we saw him get 12 targets last game, 91 yards and a touchdown. He's under 5K, and they don't have anybody else to catch the ball here. Like, maybe there's a chance Aguilar is, ends up playing this week. But Greg Ward, that's like all they have. They're really banged up. I actually think the Giants are an interesting team here on the betting angle here, because Billy is really, really beat up. And the thing about the Giants is they found some identity here the last couple of weeks. Saquon Barkley has looked like a different running back. Admittedly, the competition, Washington, Miami, 2 of the worst defenses you can find in the league. But just from watching the game film out there, he looks more dynamic, playing with a lot of confidence. I don't know if I'd roll him at 8,700 versus this rush D, but each of the last 2 weeks, they're checking down to him. 4 receptions. He's certainly not out of play in a game that could yield a decent number of points. And then the only other name that I'm really looking at maybe on the Giants side is Golden Tate. Last week, he had 11 targets in that game, 96 yards, and he's only 5,100. So I like the price on him as a guy that I think we can consider. But yeah, Sanders is really interesting name for us this week because he's been outstanding.
I think Howard's interesting at 5K there. Maybe more of a FanDuel.
No.
Maybe on the FanDuel side, he might be more interesting. If he falls in the end zone 2 times, he's paying off.
I don't.
He got the goal line carries before.
Yeah, but that was when they weren't even good. I mean,
They're still not good.
But they've at least they've won games, though.
All right.
So that's the thing. Like, I just would be shocked to see them give Jordan Howard the 23 carries he got in week 8 and week 9.
Yes.
And at that price point, you can't play him at 5K. I think that is you can't do it on DraftKings. But, you look at how far down Miles Sanders is. I mean, geez, he's like, there's like 10 running backs in front of him price-wise, and he's been one of the best running backs the last 2 weeks. So I don't think that's right.
K-Rod's 45.5. This is, again, the Eagles' offense completely depleted. The Giants' offense, Saquon, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard at this point, maybe a deep ball to Slayton. But are you going under on the 45.5? Seems like a lot for 2 teams that are not good offensively.
It does. And also, you would say, would you go the opposite way after what we just saw? These teams played earlier this month, but the total hasn't moved. It was 45.5 the first time around that Monday night game in Philadelphia. And I know that the Giants have gone over the total in their last few home games, now 3-0 to the over the last 3. But, like I mentioned before, that home dog stat, and this is all Daniel Jones too. I'm throwing out the Dolphin game. Against the Packers, against the Cowboys, against the Vikings, they didn't score more than 18 points in any of those games with Daniel Jones at quarterback against substantial competition. And that's what the Eagles, at least we can call them that in a sense. They're going to host a playoff game, so they're somewhat substantial. But the Giants, though, I don't know if they can get their offense going in this game, especially after what Daniel Jones did last week against the Redskins. And for Philadelphia, if they could find a way to win this game, 17-10, 20-13, something like that, they'll escape and get out of it, because this is an Eagles team that, you look back at it, they scored that late touchdown against Washington, the fumble return, which we know was one that you didn't expect. And also the Eagles needed a touchdown in the final minute to at least take the lead against Washington. So they scored 2 touchdowns there. They were down 27-23. So this is an offense that really hasn't been great at all. But I think defensively, I think they're going to find a way to slow down the Giants and escape with a win and win the division.
All right, guys, 425, Steelers at the Ravens. This opened with the Ravens, what was it, 2-point favorites? And then we learned that Lamar Jackson's not playing. Mark Ingram's going to get a 3-week rest because he's got a calf. Yonda's not going to play. Earl Thomas on the other side is not going to play. So it was Steelers plus 3.5. Now they're 2-point favorites on the road. They've got Duck Hodges because Mason Rudolph is done. The Ravens are sitting everybody. So Steelers -2, over under 38. Let's start with the Steelers being favorites on the road. They got to win to get into the playoffs. And all the weapons there seems like they're sitting for Baltimore. But why do you got a bitter beer face? What's going on with this, K-Raj?
Man, the Steelers are on the verge of the playoffs with Devlin freaking Hodges to save their season. I mean,
good job, Tomlin. Good job.
Yeah, look, hey, I give Mike Tomlin a lot of credit. You're even in this position to be in the playoffs, winning you're in is unbelievable, considering you lost Big Ben week 2. Antonio Brown wasn't there this year. They went, obviously Le'Veon Bell was gone. So there weren't a lot of weapons. And then you went to Mason Rudolph, who wasn't great, and then Devlin Hodges, who wasn't great. And still you made it to this point, which is amazing, even if they don't make the playoffs. But Pittsburgh, should they be favored? Yeah, because Baltimore is sitting all these guys. The MVP, Lamar Jackson's sitting out. The Ravens have nothing to play for. They have nothing to risk in this game, locking up the number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs. So really just get through this game, move on. And I think for Pittsburgh, even though they are a team that just lost to the Jets last week and didn't play well, at least now you don't have to worry about who's your quarterback because Mason Rudolph is out now. But man, I mean, this is just such a tough one because you're asking to trust Devlin Hodges to get you into the playoffs, even if you're facing RG3. That Baltimore's defense is still excellent. Pittsburgh's defense has been great. When you look at it, they've hit the under in 9 of the last 10 games. They haven't given up 17 or more in 5 straight. So that would almost be a side. I know, Holden, you're going to ask about the total, but the under you can't dispute. I'd almost just look at that more than the side because I don't really want to trust Pittsburgh in the road favorite role, but I also don't want to bank on Baltimore when this is kind of like a preseason game for them.
All right, after we get to Dan, maybe we could talk about that total just a little bit more. But Steelers-Ravens, man. Dan, RG3, any interest? Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, any interest? Any receivers going on the other side? The Steelers, they don't have a running game. Duck Hodges is there. But there's got to be one player that I could dig up here playing a GPP and try and win it that way.
Team defense. There you go.
Yeah.
That's where you want to go here. I mean, this is going to be quick for me. Baltimore, yes, they've got some cheap pieces to them who are going to get more run today, and we can usually take advantage of that in DFS. But they still only have an 18 team total. That's one of the lowest, I think, second lowest on the slate here. And it's not like they're not playing a team that has their own motivation and a team that's the one thing they do well is play defense. So I think we're getting cute if we roll Baltimore guys out here. So I think that's going to be pretty much a pass for me. Maybe you can take a shot on the wide receivers because they're under 4K, especially if Brown is ruled out, and I expect him to. Snead, Boykin, those guys are really, really cheap if you want to go total stars and scrubs. And same from the Pittsburgh side. I can't press anybody on this team. Baltimore's defense might be a little bit shorthanded, but it doesn't matter when you got such a garbage quarterback situation like Pittsburgh does. So, again, team defenses, both of them in play, and they're both fairly priced on DraftKings, right around that 3K number, 3,100 for the Ravens, 3,000 for the Steelers. That's all I'm looking at in this game.
So the total, Kevin, I see which way you're leaning toward the under at 38, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't make an argument for the over just because of the quarterbacks in this game. The Ravens will probably try to get through this without any major injuries. And even, on the road, when you look at Pittsburgh, They played the Jets. They played Arizona. They played Cincinnati, Cleveland, the Chargers, the best team, and they played San Francisco and New England way back earlier in the season. They played a bunch of nobodies on the road the last few months, and now, would it surprise me if they beat Baltimore? Absolutely not. It wouldn't surprise me just because of what the Ravens are rolling out, and the Steelers are good enough defensively to hang in the game. Just don't have Devlin Hodges throw 4 picks. If you have that, then Pittsburgh's got a good shot of winning this game. 17-10, 17-13. Baltimore moves on. They have a few weeks. They'll get set for the playoffs. And Pittsburgh, we'll see if they play next week or if their season's done.
Let's move on to college football for the first time on Lines and Lineups. Looking forward to this. So we got number 3 Clemson taking on number 2 Ohio State. This is the 8 o'clock game, the later game on Saturday. First time the Buckeyes are a dog this year. I think these are the best teams. Why are they going to be dogs? So Clemson 2-point favorites, 63.5 is the game total here. This is Clemson's first spread under 16 too. They've been at least 16-point favorites, I think, in every single game, right? They've just gone out there and rolled to this point. So let's start with a red-hot Clemson team, K-Raj, because nobody wants to play Clemson. Nobody wants to play any of these teams. These are the 4 best teams out there, but Clemson 2-point favorites against Ohio State. Give me the rundown.
Amazingly, this is the 3rd time they've played in a bowl game since the 2013 season, Holden, and Clemson has won both of those games. They won 40-35 back in January of 14, and then the Fiesta Bowl back in 2016. Clemson wiped out Ohio State 31-0. So obviously, and I get there's different players, but Clemson's obviously not afraid of taking on Ohio State in a semifinal game. And this is a Clemson team, I think, that just gets a raw deal because the ACC isn't good. And it's not their fault that Miami's down and Florida State's down and Georgia Tech is down. You have all of these teams that just aren't really that good, and Virginia is your second best team. Virginia was good this year, but we know that they're not obviously an elite team in college football, but Clemson just steamrolled everyone. I know they had the tough game against North Carolina. They almost lost at the end of the 2-point conversion, but so be it. That happens, and luckily they escaped, so their season is still alive, and we know what Clemson can do in the postseason. We see how they've beaten Alabama the last few years in the college football playoff, and this is a Clemson team that is not afraid of the moment. Dabo Swinney's been there. For Ohio State, they weren't great against Wisconsin early. They turned it on late to win the Big Ten title, and they have a good young coach in Ryan Day. Look, I know the Big Ten is better than the ACC. I'm not breaking news here on that one. But when Clemson opens up as the favorite in this game at a neutral site, I got to side with the Tigers here. I really do that. This is a Clemson team that just no one wants to give respect to at all, just because of the conference they play in. And really, it's unfair because Clemson is still an excellent team. Ohio State's excellent too. We're not taking away from them. But in this game, you got to pick a winner. And Ohio State did still beat a lot of the Rutgers and Marylands and Northwesterns. And the Big Ten is better than the ACC, but the Big Ten's still a lot of garbage they threw out this year. So I'm going to go with Clemson in this one.
Dan, what's your take here? Is Ohio State's getting 2 points against the red-hot Clemson team?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited for these games. I mean, especially this one. I mean, this could easily be a championship game in its own right. And, somebody's got to win this one to get to the championship. And, Justin Fields this year, 40 touchdowns, only 1 interception. I think people are sleeping a little bit on him, but I am a little bit nervous about how he's going to do against this kind of caliber of defense. Because if I'm Clemson here, I want to sell out against Dobbins. Now, you want to think maybe other teams have tried that and it hasn't worked because this guy has been incredible. 172 against Wisconsin, 163 against Wisconsin, 211 versus Michigan, 157 versus Penn State. So, this is just I look at the playmakers and I just don't know if Ohio State has enough on the outside, because if I'm Clemson, I'm loading up the box and I'm saying, okay, it's going to have to be Olave and KJ Hill and the biggest stage ever for Justin Fields to beat me. And I don't know that he can quite do that, where we've seen Trevor Lawrence last season win the national championship. He's got incredible weapons on the outside there in Ross and Higgins, one of the best running backs. I just feel they're a little bit more complete of a team. Dabo Swinney's been in this moment before. First time for Ryan Day. I like the Clemson side on this one. But, man, it should be an awesome game to watch.
Yeah, money's coming in on Clemson here. Dan, and 63.5. This is the fun thing about college. 63.5, 76, all these totals, just massive points. But do we get that in this game?
If I'm leaning in under on these two, it's definitely this one here, as opposed to the LSU game. I just think that both these teams are really good defensively, and they should be able to slow down each other more so than we've seen a lot of these other games so far this season that they've been involved in. So I'll take the under, but I don't think there's a ton of value in that because clearly this could kind of turn into a shootout. Both these offenses have the ability to do that, but I definitely would roll under if I'm looking at a total here.
Hey, K-Raj, I want to get into a couple things here. The total, would you see teasing any of these numbers, and is there a money line play here?
I mean, I don't really think you'd have to go money line with Clemson necessarily. I think that if they win this game, I mean, laying 2, I know it's easy to say, well, just try to get them to win by 1, but I don't really believe in that. I think that Clemson can win this game by 3 or more. I don't think Clemson wins this game by 1 point. I just don't see that. But as far as the total goes, you say a shootout perhaps, and it's so hard because when you see these numbers that they put up offensively, both these teams, that they're scoring in the 50s in some of these games, that the more important number to me, I think, is the defensive numbers because you're giving up 17 or less in all of these games. And just defensively, how good they've been, and even going back towards earlier in the season when they played Texas A&M, they allowed 10, and I think they gave up a late touchdown even in that game. I get that Clemson, again, looking at the teams they played, there weren't a lot of strong teams. I understand that. But also they played 2 SEC teams, South Carolina and Texas A&M, allowed 13 total points, and South Carolina beat Georgia. So for whatever that's worth, that they held South Carolina 3 points in that rivalry game. And as far as Ohio State goes, they lit up a lot of these teams too, but they scored 34 in Wisconsin. They scored 34 in Michigan State, who's very good defensively, not good offensively. The one they really busted out was Michigan, where they scored the 56 points. But even against Penn State, they scored 28. So we see that they can be not shut down, but controlled to a certain extent. And considering Clemson is one of the top defenses in the country, I probably lean the under and feel comfortable with it.
All right, that's the night game. Here's the day game, 4 o'clock Eastern time. Number 1 LSU, number 4 Oklahoma. By the way, the number 1 seed still has not won the national championship here. LSU 13.5-point favorites in this just remarkable total of 76. Love it. Let's see this number at least get pushed a little bit. So LSU, Oklahoma, K-Raj first, 13.5. You got Burrow, you got Hurts, you got great quarterback matchup here.
Oh, absolutely. And we know that the Heisman Trophy winners, at times, they've struggled in their bowl games. So you wonder if that's going to happen. Burrow's had so much acclaim and all of this with the Heisman that now they're facing Oklahoma, who, yeah, they should be in the Final Four because you have the top 3 in the country by far. You need a 4th team. I think Oklahoma was the 4th team. And the Sooners are a little better defensively than they were last year, and we saw them get lit up by Alabama in the first playoff game. Actually, it was the second playoff game after Clemson Notre Dame. But as far as LSU goes, defensively, they've had a couple question marks in games played away from Baton Rouge, but they allowed Georgia to just 10 points in the SEC title game, so that's a positive for them. And we know Burrow can light up anybody, and Oklahoma is not as good as some of the defenses that Joe Burrow faced this year in the SEC. So that's one. And you look at Oklahoma, who is not normally in an underdog spot, and now they are a heavy underdog, which they should be. But when you look at a guy like Jalen Hurts, who put up good numbers this year after he left Alabama to go to OU, and we know what Lincoln Riley does with quarterbacks, that all these guys put up great numbers like Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield. You know what? I'd lean LSU here. I don't love it, but, with Oklahoma, people want to take the points. You're going to have a shootout, but LSU is just so automatic, and that's what it is. And this Baylor team when you look towards or you look down the stretch with them, should have lost to Baylor in Waco, down 28-3. They came back and won that one. The Baylor game in the Big 12 championship went to overtime. K-State, they let K-State score 30-something in a row against them after leading that game. I just feel like Oklahoma's not that sharp down the stretch, that they're not playing their best football. And even though you're getting a lot of points with them, I sometimes say there's a reason why. And I'd side with LSU here. You have two talented quarterbacks, but LSU a little bit better defensively. And for Oklahoma, just not playing so great down the stretch kind of worries me.
Yeah, just as a fan, I want to see Burrow and Lawrence go head-to-head. That would be a fun championship game. That being said, they play this for a reason. 13.5 LSU. The Sharps came in, pushed this from 11 to 13.5. Dan, give me a broad view of this.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see if this gets to 14 or not. That's a very significant number here. And the fact that it's sitting at that 13.5 number, I think that the books are willing to willing to ride some Oklahoma here, because I'm guaranteeing that there's got to be heavy action here on LSU, and they have not tipped over that significant number. And it actually gives me a little bit interest here in Oklahoma for a couple reasons. First off, they're one of the few schools out there, one of the few offenses out there that I think can actually match what LSU brings to the table. Because here's the deal. You can't slow this offense down. They're too prolific. And, if you think you can beat them by being physical with them, it doesn't work. Like, you have to outscore this team. And I don't know if there's a lot of teams out there who can do that. Oklahoma is one that has a dynamic offensive player there in Jalen Hurts, a great play caller in Lincoln Riley, experience. I mean, Jalen Hurts has way more experience in this situation than Joe Burrow does. So I think Oklahoma is super interesting in this spot. If I wanted to get really, really excited about this, I don't even think Oklahoma money line is out of the question here, because everybody is riding LSU in this one. And not enough people are talking about this Edwards-Helaire injury. I mean, this guy was on crutches just last week, and now they expect him to be fully healthy, ready to play. And he's been, a main offensive cog for them. So you take him out of the equation, I think that only helps Oklahoma side. Now, admittedly, the big loss for them is on that defensive line with their top person getting sacks suspended for this game. So that's not ideal. But again, I don't view this as a game where you're slowing down Joe Burrow. It's you're keeping up with Joe Burrow, and you hope you make a play late that can edge out a win here. I don't think it's an impossibility. Not sure if I got the stones to go out and say that I'm taking Oklahoma here as, almost a 2-touchdown dog, but I think they're a live dog in this one, way more live than people are giving them credit for.
Like K-Raj, not giving him credit. Is that what it is, K-Raj? You just completely different ends of the spectrum on this one, but Dan.
I mean, look, I don't have a problem with throwing, a little bit on the money line for Oklahoma. Like, I don't think it's crazy. Is LSU head and shoulders better than Oklahoma? No, I think they're head and shoulders better than them. I think they're significantly better. But Oklahoma, like you said, Dan, they have a guy that's been there before, Jalen Hurts, and that's more than you can say for Justin Fields at Ohio State. When you look at that matchup compared to Trevor Lawrence, that Jalen Hurts has played at Alabama, and he's played in big games before, so he's not afraid of that. And for Burrow, this is a huge game for him. But also, I don't want to take away from Burrow at all, not being on that big stage as of yet. But I just think that this is an LSU team that I don't know if Oklahoma can slow them down. I think that's the big concern. Oklahoma can score, but I don't know if they can slow them down.
And that's the thing, though. I think it's just going to boil down to, can they score enough? Because you're right. I don't think anybody can slow LSU down. But I do think that Oklahoma's offense is good enough to keep up, where I think a lot of other teams that LSU played this year just never really had a chance of doing that. And I think Oklahoma might have a shot, because this isn't, you're right about, those Baylor games, but Baylor is just a defensive first type team. That's not what LSU is here. So I think, that matchup doesn't scare me so much as we get into this one.
So you think that Oklahoma can put up some points, Dan? What about 76 with the total?
I love the over here. I mean, I think it is a complete and utter shootout. If you're playing DFS, get as many of players from this game as you can. I mean, Kennedy Brooks is going to see a ton of carries here with Stevenson getting suspended, Sermon out. It's he's the guy that you need to be playing in DFS this week. But I think this game goes over 80. I think it's shootout. Again, that's the only way Oklahoma can win this game, and I just don't know if LSU's defense is going to slow them down enough to keep it in under. So I think pedal to the metal on both sides. Should be an incredible game to watch on Saturday.
Kevin, did the total of 76 just settle in at 76? Do you think we see any movement there? And do you think Oklahoma has enough to keep up with LSU to push this thing close to 80 because it's at 76?
I think we'll see money on the over just because people want to see points. And
Sure.
and for me, I want the same thing too. It wouldn't shock me if this was a game that got to 45, 40. Well, actually, even though I said I like LSU, but if it got somewhere in the 40s, that it wouldn't be crazy. I mean, if LSU won this game 52-38, would that surprise anybody?
No.
I just don't think that that's the case. And look, Dan's right about this, that some of the teams that LSU lit up this year, we dogged the other conferences, but Arkansas is terrible. Ole Miss is not good. Mississippi State's not good. Vanderbilt's not good. And you know what? LSU played them all. So LSU drew all those teams, and, the one that sticks out is the Alabama victory. They still gave up 41 to Alabama. So with all that being said, that LSU is just outscoring these teams, but also they've given up a ton of points away from Baton Rouge, and the best defensive effort they had was against Georgia in the SEC championship.
That team stinks, and that offense is terrible in Georgia.
Yeah, and Fromm couldn't get anything going with Georgia this year. They relied on their defense, and it didn't work out in the SEC championship. So, they've given up a ton of points in these games. So the under, or rather the over, I don't think is crazy because we've seen LSU get exposed in some of these road games.
Dan, I can't play DFS college football in Colorado. I've told you the story. I was listening or watching you, and I'm like, oh, man, I got to throw a lineup in here. I love college football. And they said I couldn't do it. It drove me nuts, but I'm interested. So a couple more picks here. You said you need the fantasy greatness from Oklahoma, LSU. Throw me a couple of names from Clemson and Ohio State. Okay, Dan froze. That's fine. K-Rod, you just want to throw in a couple of names there from the two sides? Anybody, Clemson, Ohio State, sexy to you?
I mean, past the quarterbacks,
Nothing.
No. I think that we'll just stick with those guys and be done with it.
All right, there's Dan. Dan,
sorry about that. Yeah. So,
fantasy goodness from Clemson, Ohio State.
Yeah, let's go to that game here. Man, this is a tough spot. I think Justin Ross is an interesting guy in DFS because he's a little bit cheaper, especially on FanDuel. Actually, on DraftKings, he's more expensive than Higgins, which is surprising. But both of those guys under $6K. But, man, I think if you want to get interest, I'm going to have so much Oklahoma and LSU. Yeah. I don't have a lot of guys on Clemson and Ohio State that I feel like we have to play here. Especially it's a 4-game slate. If you're running because that'll be the big kind of showdown spot. That'll be the game the single game that's going to have the biggest GPPs out there. I'm probably running Trevor Lawrence out there as my captain. This is a guy who actually has been running the ball a ton this year compared to what we've seen previously. So yes, Fields is the big runner. There's no question about that. But his numbers haven't been great since the injury, and Lawrence is not afraid to call his own number at the goal line. So I like him as the captain if I'm playing that single game over there.
All right, guys. That's the 5 games we're getting to today here in Lines and Lineups. K-Raj, I know you guys are giving out some NBA picks here, right, for free?
Yes, we actually have. Well, we had our podcast that we taped earlier today. We gave out a few of the picks for the Christmas Day games for Wednesday.
Good. I like that. Anything else you want to plug on VegasInsider.com?
Well, look, we have a lot of bowl games coming up, and it's going to be very busy over the next week and a half or so. And we have, like we talked about, the semifinal games this Saturday, and then week 17 of the NFL, and then the playoffs. college basketball conference play will finally begin in about a week or so after we get through this weekend, and the calendar flips to January. So looking forward to that. The NBA, obviously, very busy. So it's just a busy time. It really is. Even though football is winding down, we still have a lot going on, and we're very excited about it here at VegasInsider.com.
Yeah, the NBA starts for me on Christmas, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm playing, but it's time to start paying attention now. Dan, RotoGrinders, we do have college football information on DFS. We got all the NFL stuff. For those of you guys that are just solely bettors and maybe playing a fantasy league or two, if you are interested, DFS goes all the way up, even in the showdown slate through the Super Bowl. So there is a lot still to be had here on RotoGrinders for DFS there, Dan.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll have it all the way through the playoffs, and some of those GPPs are going to be massive, and they're a lot of fun to play, even if it's just a couple of games. One thing I do want to give you guys the early heads up on, sharpside.com. Make sure you download that app for iOS and Android. Starting the first of the year, we've got a new kind of streak contest going, but what we're doing this go around is the streak bets, the lock bets. You can make them on the app. It's any bet. Could be a prop, could be a total, could be a line, could be a money line. Anything that's 140 or less, you can lock that in. You can do one at a time, and if you build your streak, once you get up to 6, we're going to give you $10 for every pick up to, I think it's like 10, and then if you're still alive after that, then we go up to $20, and we're going to give you all sorts of FanDuel credit on this, all the way up to a couple hundred. Or up to 100 if you just rock it all the way up to like 20, which nobody has done on the app to this point. But we're building you incentive for putting your best pick in on that app. It's a lot of fun. Download it. Free to play too. Sharpside.com is the website, and search it for iOS and Android. And that will get started on the 1st. But if you've got a streak already, when the 1st starts up, that's at like 6, we'll pay you right off the bat. So there's no reason not to get started using those lock bets on the app.
All right, guys. If there's any ladies, thank you very much. K-Raj at VegasInsider.com. Dan's at RotoGrinders.com. I do work with RotoGrinders.com. Week 17, lines and lineups in the book. Say bye, guys.
See you later. Enjoy it, guys.
Thanks, guys. Good season. Thank you.